This Rough Country Pro Series 9,500 pound winch with steel cable is for anyone who has a 1987 all the way up through the most current model year Wrangler that are looking for a no frills winch that's just going to be there to get the job done. This is a 2 out of 3 wrenches for the installation because, of course, with a winch, it's an electric component. You do have to do a little bit of wiring, but even if you aren't all that comfortable with automotive wiring, this is still going to be pretty easy for you, and we're going to show you how to do it in just a second. So when you're shopping for a winch, there are a couple of big decisions to make, and the first is going to be the pulling capacity of the winch. This is a 9,500 pound winch. They go all the way up to 12,000 pounds and even more, but 9,000 to 12,000 is usually what you see for a Jeep. And the general rule of thumb is that you want your winch to be able to pull 1.5 times the loaded trail weight of your vehicle. So if you have a big, heavy, armored up 4-door JK, you get it buried up to the axles in mud every weekend, then you're probably going to want a winch that pulls a little bit more. If you have a lightweight TJ, maybe you get high centered every once in a while and just need a little bit of a yank, a lighter winch like this one will be just fine for you. The other big decision you're going to need to make is what kind of wire or line you want on your winch. This, of course, is a steel cable on here, and that's the most traditional style of line for a winch. It's going to be fairly abrasion resistant, doesn't require a lot of maintenance, and overall is just going to be a workhorse. Now, the downside to a steel cable, if there is any, is that while it stretches under load, it also stores that energy, and if the line breaks under load, it'll fling through the air, it can cause damage, or worse, it can cause injury. And that's where we step up into a synthetic line. So it has a lot of the same characteristics of steel, however, it doesn't store energy when it's under a load, so if it breaks, it just falls harmlessly to the ground. That's the big benefit to a synthetic line. Now, the drawback to a synthetic line is that it is more expensive, less abrasion resistant, and does require to be changed out a little bit more often, just generally a little bit more upkeep and a little bit more maintenance. So definitely pros and cons to each type. Again, what we have here is a steel cable that's traditional. It's just going to be your workhorse. Along with the winch itself, the steel cable already installed on it, you're going to get the other parts and pieces that you need to run this winch on your Jeep. So you have your clevis here, and this little loop is there so that you don't have to put your fingers through the clevis. It's just a little bit safer, easier to let go of, just in case the winch does get into a situation that you don't want it, you don't want your fingers too close, and that's what that red little loop is there for. Over here you have your remote. This is going to be a wired remote. Very simple, just an in and an out button. Again, no frills here, pretty bare bones, pretty straightforward. Over here is your Fairlead. This is going to be a roller Fairlead, and that's the style you want for a steel cable. If this has synthetic line, you would be looking at a Hawes Fairlead. So I've said it a couple times now, this is just going to be a pretty basic winch, and really what I mean by that is there are no additional outlets on this for running 12-volt lights or other accessories. There's no wireless remote. It's not going to be a waterproof solenoid box. It doesn't have an air compressor built into it. It doesn't have all of those other things that, while they can be nice if you want them and are going to use them, they also drive the price up considerably. So because this doesn't have a lot of those frills, it's able to keep the cost down a little bit, and this winch comes in at right around that $300 mark. And there are quite a few winches of this design, of this style on the market that are going to be right around that price tag, so I think it's going to be a pretty fair deal for you. Like I said before, this is going to be pretty easy to install onto your Jeep. Again, 2 out of 3 wrenches. Let's show you how to do it.
Tools required for this installation: a 1/4 inch drive, also a 3/8 inch drive, various extensions, a universal swivel socket, 10mm, 14, 16, and 19mm sockets, 18mm wrench, a pair of diagonal or side cutters, a pair of needle nose pliers is very helpful, a sharp razor knife, gloves while working with the winch wire, and an impact is optional. Alright, so the first step in any winch install is to get our Fairlead onto our winch capable bumper. I have the largest of the hardware in this Rough Country winch kit. This is a 19mm head and an 18mm nut on the back side. So I'm just going to start my hardware and then get in there with some tools and tighten it up. Alright, as you can see, this is a double roller setup, so it's going to be tough to get a socket in there. So I'm going to go into the back side, get my socket onto that nut, and grab a wrench and just tighten it up. All right, so there are a few things we need to do before installing our Rough Country winch onto our winch capable bumper. You'll see that we have our ground wire right here. So So what I'm going to do is flip our winch over and expose this 13mm nut right here. Now I'm going to loosen this up. And then I'm going to slide on this end of my ground terminal to this ground on the motor itself. And I'm going to position it in a way so it's facing the rear of the winch. Make sure that's nice and tight. Flip it back over. Make sure our wires are running together just like that. And then after we're done with adding our ground wire to our winch, we're gonna take our nuts and insert them into the feet of our winch and then follow them up with a piece of tape just to make sure that they don't go anywhere when we maneuver this winch onto our bumper. So I'm just gonna take some time right now and add all 4 of the nuts to the 4 feet on the bottom of our winch, and then we'll get this installed. All right, now we're bringing the winch in and we are lowering it slowly over to our bolt holes, making sure it all lines up. And we're just gonna put our wires off to the side here and wire that up last. So next we're gonna get our 4 16mm bolts through the bottom of our winch plate into those feet where we put the tape and the captured nuts. All right, so we are underneath the Jeep right now and we are attaching the 16mm hardware to the captured nuts that we just put that tape on. Now take your time in doing this. It depends on what bumper you are installing this winch on. This one is a little tight, so it is going to take us just a little bit of time, but if you are patient, you can just start a couple threads and then finish it off with an impact or a regular ratcheting wrench. Just make sure that they are very nice and tight because that is what is securing your winch to that plate. So on my impact, I have a 6-inch extension with a universal swivel and my short 16mm socket. We're just going to buzz these on and make sure they are nice and tight. All right, so what we're gonna do next is get our winch cable and eye through our Fairlead. Now you can see there are 2 zip ties here, and I added this piece of wire right here. It's just a piece of wire I found laying around the shop. And what I'm going to do is wrap up my needle nose pliers in this wire, and that's gonna act as a handle to help pull that eye through. And you will notice I'm wearing gloves. Anytime you're really messing around with winch cables or winches in general, I highly recommend you wear a pair of gloves. Now I'm gonna cut these zip ties, and at the same time, I'm going to disengage the winch drive. So we just rotate it 180 degrees. That's going to unlock our drum. I'm going to push my eye through. I'm gonna lock it up at the same time because I don't want it to spool all the way out. And as you can see, that pair of needle nose pliers helped me pull that eye through. Now I'm going to add my hook. So for the hook, you're just gonna put a pin through and then set your cotter pin through that pin there. Make sure you bend the tabs up. You just want to bend one of these so it's not going to pop out. Now we're just going to put this onto our hook, and then we're going to wire up the winch. All right, so the next step is wiring up the winch. Now you'll see we are on the passenger side right next to our turn signal. There is a nice clear path right behind that turn signal. So I'm going to feed the wire up just behind our radiator support. We're going to run the power and the ground through this pathway. Get it close to my positive terminal for my battery. Just like that. And then I'm going to get my ground cable now. All right, now we're gonna wire up our winch. I have a 10mm socket on my 1/4-inch drive. We are going to connect our positive side first. And you can see there are some accessory terminals on our battery right here. So we are going to utilize one on our positive And then we are going to also utilize the one on our negative side. All right, now let's go test out our winch. All right, so let's go ahead and test this winch. I have the controller in my hand and the control box right here. So there is a little tab or a slot, and it can only go in one way. And you have an in and out. So I'm going to suck it in a little bit and see if I can't get this wire rope a little tighter on that drum. All right, and there it is right there. You can see that there's tension on that and it won't go anywhere and it won't make noise going down the road. So we can unplug our controller and make sure you put that cap back on so you don't want anything going into those terminals. All right, that's gonna wrap up my install of this Rough Country Pro Series 9500 winch. And for all things Jeep, keep it here at ExtremeTerrain.com.